In the 25th anniversary edition of the Santos Tour Down Under, race director Stuart O'Grady had decided he wanted to try something new, and remarkably, in these much-raced Adelaide Hills, he managed to find a climb called Notts Hill. This was to be the Big Queen stage today, and this was to be the throwdown between the best climbers and those who could hang on throughout the race. Still wearing the ochre leader's jersey, Sam Welsford, who'd won the opening two stages in the sprint. This was a stage, if any, that we were certain was not going to finish in a bunch sprint. However, there was an awful lot of accumulated climbing along the way, lots of ups and downs, and opportunities for anyone who did drop off to chase their way back on. As it was a relatively quiet opening to the race, but trust me, things really kicked off on the back half. This was the course, 2 laps of that Uradler circuit, having started on the eastern edge of Adelaide in Norwood, and 2 climbs of the brand new Notts Hill. There's the man who's responsible for it, Stuart O'Grady, waving the flag. And at first, it looked like being a calmer start to things, unlike the attacking we've been seeing. Ineos Grenadiers once again at it today, really keen to get up the road and fire riders up the road. Connor Swift amongst them, and he was joined, no great surprise, by the FX King of the Mountains jersey wearer, Fergus Browning. Fergus Browning took maximum points at the top of Norton Summit. This stage, like so many Santos Tour Down Under stages, climbing from the off. And in the end, Connor Swift leaving Fergus Browning to get on with it. For the second day in a row, it looked like we might be left with just the 21-year-old Aussie out front, but no, he was to get company this time in the shape of Frenchman Geoffroy Bouchard, riding for Decathlon Agi Desert Le Mondial, and he would be a useful co-worker along with Fergus Browning as they rode their way further and further into the lofty ranges, up into the Adelaide Hills. And the jostling for position had started as well, because everyone was aware of how tricky the run-in would be to Notts Hill. A twisty, windy descent, and in the many feed zones that we now see, as of this year, with an increase in feed zones in World Tour races, a crash too, and a problem for Stevie Williams, defending champion. Yesterday, of course, it was Sam Welsford on the deck. Today, last year's winner of this race overall, Stevie Williams, coming down and having a steady ride to get back in, having cut his elbow and his knee. Chris Harper, Jaco Alula and Luke Plapp keen to stir things up at the front, but they were locking horns with the Red Bull Bora Hansgrohe boys. Sam Welsford had been dropped, but was valiantly battling on, much to the applause of the crowd as well, who were enjoying his battling. Colour order coming into play at the front, EF Education Easy Post on the left, Picnic Post NL in the middle, and gradually stringing down for the first run into the base of the climb through the twisty, windy descent too. Ineos Grenadiers have been trying all sorts all day, and it wouldn't be the last for them to have a go too. Remarkably, it was Danny van Poppel leading into the climb as well, having been on lead-out duties the last 2 days. And as I say, Ineos Grenadiers happy to play more cards. Lucas Hamilton stirring it up before we saw Jay Vine, Oscar Onley, Michal Kwiatkowski here having a go, and a very sharp-looking Remy Rochas, the French climber for Groupama FDJ. He would have a go too, as would others, pinging themselves off the front constantly in what was basically a reducing and constantly reducing leading group on Notts Hill. Notts Hill was proving its worth for sure, and it steepened in places. That was where Luke Plapp chose to go from the back of the peloton, where he'd been languishing a lot of the stage, keeping out of the way of trouble, to the front to stir things up again. Jay Vine looking really good, as was Jonathan Narvaez, and then Remy Rochas had a go again, catching them all off guard down the outside, and a snappy acceleration to take himself almost to the top of Notts Hill by himself, but he wasn't getting tons of daylight. What was happening though was the leading group of riders was getting smaller and smaller. And that was where Javier Romo chose to go over the top. The 26-year-old Spaniard riding for Movistar, not someone we'd been talking of, and my suspicion was also not someone that the other riders in there had been thinking of as a big threat today. His climbing talent has been shown off on multiple occasions these last few years, the former triathlete, but it was too much for Oscar Onley to wait for. He put in a vicious attack, last year's Wollonga Hill winner, to get across to Chris Harper and others who've been also trying their hand. This was a really sharp-looking move from the Scotsman. But I tell you something, it wasn't enough to catch this guy. Javier Romo was absolutely flying. He'd caught them off guard, but just as much as a tactical feat, it was a physical feat. They were not able to get with him. He was into the barriers as well, the 26-year-old Spaniard, and looking really, really good. bit more looking around going on behind. Oscar Onley being overlapped again by Chris Harper, bringing up Luke Plapp. Plapp keen to use the big chainring he had on for the long, fast descent, but it was all going to be too little and too late to catch Javier Romo, who to this point had never taken a professional victory, and what a way to do it. A professional victory in the World Tour at the Santos Tour Down Under on the Queen's stage. The sprint behind was looking good, but it was Jonathan Narvaez understandably dipping just ahead of the others. Albert Philipsen, the youngest man in the race, the 18-year-old for Lidl Trek, coming through with a late dip there on the line too to take fourth place. Finn Fisher-Black gave Narvaez a good battle for his final placing, but Javier Romo, the best of all of them, taking the 10-second bonus on the line as well, and with it taking over the Oka leader's jersey. What a remarkable way to win your first professional victory at the beginning of the World Tour season. There it was, the Spaniard on top ahead of Ecuadorian champion Jonathan Narvaez. Patrick Conrad, having moved up to third, having been in the break yesterday, this was the overall standings. And there he was on the podium, surprising a few, but he won't be doing that one again because everyone knows he will be in Oka tomorrow for the long trip down the coast. It's the seaside stage tomorrow. Join me, Jez Cox and Adam Blythe to see how beautiful it looks.